It's one of the most memorable moments, not just of the Urban Meyer era at Ohio State, but of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry in the decades they've been playing. Dontre Wilson being hit hard on a kickoff return, encircled by Wolverines, and fighting his way out as a true freshman. The images and videos of Dontre connecting clean with a Michigan defender's helmet, of Marcus Hall flipping the bird to all of Ann Arbor, of Urban Meyer looking completely baffled, and of Brady Hoke, well, clapping like usual, have become notorious. Every Buckeye fan, every Wolverine fan, and probably most college football fans would know what you're talking about when you say the Dontre Wilson fight, or the Ohio State-Michigan fight. They may not know the history, though, the intricacies of the story, how Dontre Wilson ended up in the spot he ended up in, how Ohio State and Michigan got to that point, and what actually happened on November 30th, 2013. Let's tell that story. Dontre Wilson was the quintessential Urban Meyer recruit, a high four-star from DeSoto, one of Texas's foremost high school football programs. The 5'10" H-back fit perfectly in the Percy Harvin mold that Meyer had helped popularize and recruited so many times before. Dontre wasn't just a typical Urban Meyer H-back, slot receiver, or whatever you wanted to call him, though. Dontre heralded the arrival of a system, of a style of doing things, of a new way of life at Ohio State. Dontre Wilson wasn't an Urban Meyer recruit. He was the Urban Meyer recruit. He was the ultimate harbinger for what an Urban Meyer tenure at Ohio State would look like. He was a highly touted, out-of-state speedback, the three things diametrically opposed to the prior regime at Ohio State that focused on landing in-state talent and running over opponents with power option and defense. He was a signing day flip, the kind of recruit that Buckeye fans would have never seen Jim Tressel look at, let alone recruit as intensely as Urban Meyer did. He was the manifestation of Urban Meyer's approach to running a football program, and he was really the final step for Ohio State to transform from a program coached by Urban Meyer into a program run by Urban Meyer. Let's talk about Urban Meyer a little bit and get an idea of exactly how he runs a football program. Every Urban Meyer team looks pretty similar because he has a very specific way he likes to do things, both on the recruiting trail and in developing his players. Every good Urban Meyer team has an elite safety, a tough leader at linebacker, a pack of offensive linemen with a mean streak, a smart quarterback he can trust, and, of course, a game changer at wide receiver. That last point goes all the way back to his time as the receivers coach at Notre Dame, when he turned wideout David Givens into a threat not just in the air but on the ground in the Fighting Irish's option offense. From then on, just about every Meyer team had a hybrid player, be it Cole Magner at Bowling Green, Ben Moa and Steve Savoy at Utah. He always had one. It was a crucial part of the Urban Meyer formula that makes his offenses work as well as they do. Florida didn't have a true hybrid player, one of those receivers that Urban Meyer turned into a running back as well when he arrived, so he went out and landed five-star Percy Harvin. Immediately, Harvin provided the spark that Meyer's offense so desperately needed to succeed. He added the extra dimension that made everything work as he gashed defenses seemingly every time he touched the football. Harvin's sophomore season was the stuff of legend. 83 carries for 764 yards and 6 touchdowns, 59 receptions for 858 yards and 4 more scores. He was unstoppable. While the team around him wasn't quite ready to compete at an elite level, Harvin was a bright spot. He was the future of that offense. In 2008, his teammates caught up, and thanks to another excellent season from Harvin, they had the spark needed to win a second title in 3 seasons. While Harvin's numbers were down slightly in 2008, he still made a huge impact. He was that Florida offense. He was the key to everything. He was the Urban Meyer hybrid position taken to its logical end. He was the ultimate Meyer player. He was also the last true Meyer H-back, at least until Dontre Wilson. Urban tried to make it work with Brandon James, Chris Rainey, Trey Burton, and Jeff Demps, but it was never the same. They never had that spark again, and just like that, Urban was gone.
Less than a month after coaching his final game at the University of Florida, Urban Meyer has a new job. ESPN announced that it has hired the former Gators coach as a college football analyst. He'll be making his debut tomorrow during ESPNU's National Signing Day special. Meyer will also contribute to ESPN's Saturday morning college game day. So there you go.
With his temporary departure from college football went the hybrid position, as several schools tried and mostly failed to replicate the success Florida had with Harbin. It wasn't until Meyer returned, a season removed, at Ohio State in November 2011. His return didn't only mean nearly guaranteed success for the Buckeyes, it meant the revival of a position that had gone out of vogue a bit after Harbin's departure to the NFL in 2008. It wasn't immediate. Urban Meyer was working almost entirely with Jim Tressel recruits in 2012, and because of the style Tressel ran, there just weren't really any players that fit the requirements. Corey Brown tried to fill the role as best he could, running 11 times for 96 yards and a score on top of his usual receiving duties, but he just obviously wasn't a natural fit. Instead, Meyer found his extra dimension from Braxton Miller's running ability out of the quarterback spot. It wasn't the same, though, but it was enough for Ohio State to win all 12 of their games, and it was enough for Miller to put up some gaudy stats on top of some incredible highlights. That wasn't enough for Meyer, though. He needed his hybrid player, his game changer, to make Ohio State truly feel like home rather than just a rental program. Enter Dontre Wilson. Dontre Wilson's recruitment was an immensely interesting one. It was really a battle all the way to the end, and to get a better idea of that recruitment cycle as a whole and the player that Dontre was as a recruit, I talked to Luke Zimmerman, who used to write for Land Grant Holy Land. He covered the recruitment of Dontre and knows significantly more about it than I could or would from research.
I think the recruitment of Dontre Wilson was a bit of a turning point for the Ohio State football program when all of a sudden you saw a electric playmaker in the DeAnthony Thomas mold not only skirt Oregon in favor of the Buckeyes, but very literally go back on a commitment and then make one to Ohio State. I think he became the first of many guys in the so-called Percy Harvin mold, which ultimately just went to show that there weren't that many Percy Harvins in the world. But Dontre Wilson certainly was an electric prospect. He was a big get out of DeSoto, Texas, where coincidentally enough, my high school's football coach, Claude Mathis, helped shape Wilson into the electric playmaker that he ultimately became.
Dontre's freshman season at Ohio State was a mixed bag. He had some big plays, like a 51-yard kickoff return in his first game against Buffalo, a 26-yard receiving touchdown against Penn State, and a 24-yarder against Indiana. But those were just flashes of his ability. It felt like the entire season was just scratching the surface of what Dontre could be, as he struggled with consistency and spent time behind Devin Smith, Corey Brown, Jordan Hall, and Carlos Hyde, among others. For most of the 2013 season, Dontre continued to be exactly what he was for much of his recruitment. He was a nearly mythical player, someone with limitless potential and ability who could score at almost any time, but for the most part, he was still just hype. He was a 5-star recruit who had proved little in his first season as a college football player. The future was bright, sure, but not any brighter than previously thought. That changed in the final game of the regular season. The Michigan game means everything for Ohio State. Every year, no matter what, job number one for the Buckeyes is to beat Michigan. It's not just a rivalry, it's a way of life. Ohio State hates Michigan, and Michigan hates Ohio State. And to appease that hatred, every year, the two teams meet and bludgeon each other for 60 minutes. Usually it's nothing more than an emotionally charged football game. The hatred certainly isn't lost on the players, many of whom grow up fans of the team they eventually play for. But that generally just translates to harder hits, more effort, and a more significant outcome to the players. The other times, though, those are the lifeblood of Ohio State, Michigan. The times when the game became more than a game. When Ohio State tore down Michigan's M Club banner in 1973, and Michigan announcer Bob Ufer declared that the Buckeyes would meet a dastardly fate.
A dastardly fate here for that. There isn't a Michigan man stadium who wouldn't like to go out and scalp those Buckeyes right now. They have the audacity, the unmitigated gall to tear down the covenant M that Michigan's going to run out from under.
When David Boston and Charles Woodson fist fought during the 1997 game. When all that anger and hatred boils over into an all-out battle. That's what separates Ohio State-Michigan from the other rivalries. On November 30th, 2013, Dontre Wilson wrote his own chapter in the Ohio State-Michigan saga. Ohio State was trailing early in the second quarter 21-14 after a particularly disastrous start from the consistently sketchy Buckeye defense. Michigan quarterback Devin Gardner spent pretty much the entire first quarter carving up Ohio State's secondary and had just thrown a 17-yard touchdown pass to Jeremy Gallen. Michigan kicker Matt Wiles' kickoff went a few yards deep into the end zone. Dontre Wilson returned it and was brought down by what may have been a face mask from Michigan cornerback Dennis Norfleet, though it went uncalled. After the tackle, Dontre was surrounded by 8 maize and blue helmets. Words were exchanged, and just like that, Dontre's helmet was gone. Several punches had been thrown. Flags were everywhere, and that was it. Just like that, it was over. Just about 20 seconds of an all-out brawl, and then nothing. Dontre was ejected, as was Buckeye lineman Marcus Hall, who ran onto the field during the fight and exited in, well, iconic fashion. That was pretty much it. The rest of the game was snippy, sure, but that's no different from every other Ohio State-Michigan game. Neither player was suspended for the incident, and both played in Ohio State's Big Ten championship loss against Michigan State the next week. There was some newspaper navel-gazing from various monocle owners, but that was pretty much it. Everybody moved on because, well, a fight in a football game isn't really a big deal. That's kind of the point. Sure, you don't want a boxing match to break out in a football game, but it's not much more than just organized violence, just prettied up and given points-based objectives. At its core, football is people hitting each other, and the fight was just an unsanctioned version of that, an explosion of emotion. I do think that explosion of emotion is worth looking into a bit further, though. The fight started, as I mentioned, with the Norfleet tackle, but it doesn't continue with Norfleet. He's gone almost immediately, off to celebrate his big hit. In his place are initially 5 Michigan players: Jehu Chesson, Diamante Thomas, Delano Hill, Sion Huma, and Royce Jenkins Stone. It's hard to tell, but it looks like Dontre gets shoved, at least slightly, as he's trying to get up by Chesson and Jenkins Stone. That was likely the actual start of the fight. After that shove, everything becomes a blur pretty quickly. 3 more Michigan players, Jordan Lewis, Jeremy Clark, and Raymond Taylor, get involved, as do Buckeyes Von Bell and Noah Spence, though all 5 are mostly just talking. Dontre's talking too, to Jenkins Stone. He's pushed from the front by Clark, from the back by Hill, and then all hell breaks loose. The bench is clear, and it's almost impossible to see what happens for the next few seconds. When the camera shifts, though, it becomes a little more apparent. Jenkins Stone pulls Dontre's helmet off. Hill shoves Spence and bumps into Dontre, and, well, I'm going to put this next part as elegantly as it deserves. Dontre rocked him. You wouldn't think you could do a whole lot of damage with a punch to a man wearing a helmet, and in terms of lasting effect, he didn't, which is probably for the best. But in that moment, in this whole scrum, one person got off a clean punch, and it was the undersized freshman hyped for his finesse and ability to avoid contact. The freshman with no real connections to Ohio or to what makes Ohio State and Michigan hate each other so much. He was the one that delivered a right hook into another man's soul because of a football game. For a better idea of what all this meant at the time, and just to get a different perspective on the whole thing, I reached out to DJ Byrnes, who blogs about the Buckeyes better than just about anybody and covered the game at the time.
I didn't go to I was in Ann Arbor. I actually watched it on the hotel room. TV while doing the blogging. And yeah, up until that point, you know, I'd always thought it was entirely stupid for, you know, a football player to hit another football player in the face while wearing a helmet. And that switched. I mean, it switched to good instantly upon freshman Dontre Wilson plug in. He took on basically the whole team on the opening kickoff, right in the Michigan game. And for a freshman to come in, especially one from like Texas who hadn't necessarily grown up in the rivalry, or especially when it was like considered a rivalry, you know, pre-Jim Tressel, for him to do that, I mean, it was phenomenal. And it basically set the tone for the whole game. And it was basically, you know, you're not even trying to punk our freshmen, but, you know, we're not gonna have that.
As crazy as it is to say, Dontre Wilson won that fight. Sure, he was ejected and the Michigan players weren't, but he has three things that they don't. Firstly, Ohio State won that game, finishing an undefeated season as Michigan finished 7-5 and continued to employ Brady Hoke. Secondly, Dontre Wilson is a national champion. Dontre Wilson will forever be a national champion, and no one can ever take that away from him. He was a legitimate contributor on that 2014 team, and he will go down as one of the few people to walk this earth with a college football national title ring. Finally, and I think most importantly, Dontre Wilson fought a man wearing a helmet and threw the only punch. Dontre Wilson took on the entirety of the Michigan Wolverines special teams coverage unit as an 18-year-old, and the only punch in the whole scrap came from him. Dontre Wilson is a legend.